Welcome to Story Strategy Live from Evident Inc. This is episode 18, Stories in the Wild, Exploring Character. Let me pop that little guy down. There's Dawn. Hi, Dawn.
Hi.
How are you
How
doing?
are you?
Well, I am doing fine. I got myself set up in a new room here, so hopefully there won't be dogs peeing on the floor and children running through and husbands coming home and all that good stuff.
But that's my favorite part. Well, the dog, at least.
No, because he's the story today, which is probably not surprising. But so I grew up in a house where dogs were only allowed in certain rooms and they were not allowed to jump. And my mom trained very well-behaved dogs. And so that is kind of my expectation. Of course, I don't know how to achieve the same result, but we're working on it. But so I promised my husband that, because he's allergic to dogs, that this dog that we would get would not ever go upstairs into bedrooms and get his fur and everything all over all of his stuff. And, you know, that seems easy enough to do because the stairs are a pretty clear delineation. And that's been just fine as long as he's been a tiny puppy. And we basically had to carry him up and downstairs. But I was blow drying my hair this morning and the kids were supposed to be watching the dog downstairs. They had he stays in a pen a lot of the time when nobody's, pointed out to be responsible for him. So he can roam around a little bit, but he can't really go wherever. And he's taken to eating cords. So he definitely has to be contained. We're not watching him. So they're watching him and I'm blow drying my hair. And all of a sudden I'm like, why? This house that we're renting has one of these new modern master bath situations where there is no door on the bathroom. I don't understand why this is a thing. You're in the master bedroom and it just goes and there's the sinks and the bathtub and the shower. There is a tiny little room with a toilet in it, so you can close the door for that. But otherwise it's like you're just out there. So I took a shower, I'm standing there blow drying my hair, and one of my kids, I think, comes in the room. I hear someone in the room and I'm like, hey, I'm taking a shower. What? And I turn around, there's nobody there, but I still hear the person. And then I see a little brown butt going into the closet. And I was like, wait a minute. He was very guilty, but now he knows that there's a whole other world he wasn't exposed to before. And he's like, wait a minute. I know where all the good stuff is. So we have trouble.
Oh, but it's cute trouble. It's cute furry trouble.
Until it poops in your closet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then it's not so cute.
No.
That's not so cute at all.
Not so cute.
And I just have to say, I do not understand the no door on the bathroom policy thing at all. I don't get that.
Well, and we are still looking for a house because we're renting this one for a year. The idea was, figure out where we really want to live and hopefully buy the house. My kids will go away to college and that will be our house forever and I'll die in it or who knows. But I would like a door on the master bathroom. Mm-hmm. But a million houses, I don't know if it's a Colorado thing. I really didn't notice it in Maryland or if it's a new construction thing. But me no likey. Because if he goes to bed after me and I'm laying there sleeping, he goes in and brushes his teeth and I'm wide awake. It's so stupid.
Yeah, it's like being in a hotel where it's all open. No, I wouldn't like that.
Yeah. Why would we do this, people? Let's rethink it.
Yeah. No, I need my doors.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of doors.
Good fences make good neighbors, strong doors make good marriages.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that completely. Okay. We have to say hi to Julie.
Hi, Julie. All right. What are we doing today?
We are starting a new series within our series called Stories in the Wild.
Woo!
I was expecting a different reaction. So what we're talking about doing is talking about branching out from just novels and fiction and romance and the areas that we normally are in and talking about stories all across all sorts of media. And so today we're talking about characters and which characters we like, which characters we don't like, what we like about them, that kind of thing. And we're basically today going to focus on TV and movie characters, I think.
Well, I think this is a good chance to kind of say that, we got this whole thing rolling a couple months ago with no super strategic direction in mind. Just we knew we wanted to dissect stories and figure out why they worked, why they didn't work. And so now I think we've kind of laser focused a bit, or at least narrowed our aperture to, we're not going to consult with you about indie publishing or tell you how to market your book necessarily, unless we're talking about a blurb. Because there's so many places where you can do that already, and so many great resources for all of that kind of stuff. So we felt like the place that we have a lot of strength is in specifically stories. So whether it's movies, television, books, we want to explore what makes stories tick, what makes them work, what makes them fall down. And so parts and pieces of that are things that we'll look at with a laser focus, like characterization and plot.
Mm-hmm.
But then we'll talk about bigger stuff too, like different ways that story influences culture, different ways that story gets used even in, the business world. So I think it's going to be kind of fun really focusing on this concept, because story is part of what drives humanity. Everything about our culture is built around us telling each other stories or telling ourselves stories. So I think we know what we're doing now, people.
We knew what we were doing before. Well, and what I love about the vision we have for this, I guess, series or feature or whatever, is that if we can look at these stories and break them down a little bit and talk about why they work and why they don't, then our authors can think about, okay, so how does that apply to my work? And okay, well, they said this didn't work for them in this story. And one of the things that I think is going to become very clear in this is it is all very subjective.
Oh, totally.
But I think this doesn't quite work in this story, but if I turn that 90 degrees, it's going to be perfect for what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're hoping will come out of this.
Yes. So we tried to kind of scan our brains a bit, think about things that we've both seen recently and maybe not so recently. And so we'll have some good examples for you, hopefully, as we go through this today. It's going to be a little fly by night because we figured we would just talk and see what happens.
We're just jumping in. So talking about characters, we're going to start off kind of with what makes a good character. Because there's kind of two ideas on story. Is the heart of the story the character, is the heart of the story the plot, which means the events that are happening in the story. And I can argue both sides of that. But for today, we're going to pretend like the heart of the story is the character.
Which I think it is. Although, well, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it can go either way. It can go either way. So when we're talking about a character, the main thing, what is the thing that draws the reader in or draws the viewer in? What is the thing that makes that character a great character?
So my initial reaction would be to say it's got to be somebody relatable. But then I think about some of the characters that I have loved the most, like think Glenn Close in The Devil Wears Prada?
Mm-hmm.
Not relatable.
Yes.
Is it Glenn Close? Is that the right name? Yeah, she's the one that boils the bunny. Yeah.
Yes. I know she's in Fatal Attraction. So, well, okay.
Examples both, because she's not relatable in either case. Well,
I think she's not likable.
Okay, yeah, you're right. But you can still see what's driving her, I guess, if you drill down.
Right. And I think that's the key, because it's not that the character has to be exactly like you or to make the same decisions you would make in that, because hopefully Meryl Streep. Thank you.
Right? Who the heck
boiled the bunny? Glenn Close did boil a bunny. But we can work with both of those. So, but it's if you take the
right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I didn't think that was, but if you take the character and they're not you, and a lot of times you don't want them to be you, and so hopefully nobody's going to boil a bunny in reaction to a guy dumping you.
Do you know who I was thinking about? I'm sorry. When I said The Devil Wears Prada, I was thinking about Cruella Deville. Was that one close at least?
I think so.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just needed to
We
flush
went
out.
several directions with that. My point, and we can make it with Cruella Deville too. Cruella Deville is actually a little harder because thinking about, if we go back to Fatal Attraction and you think about the fact that, okay, I would have not broke into this person's house and killed their pet, but you can relate to that anger and you can relate to the disappointment and being dumped. And so even you have to have that little tiny tether of a connection.
Yeah.
Cruella Deville is harder to connect to because I've never had the urge to make a coat out of puppies.
Oh, come on.
I mean,
Haven't we all?
Dalmatians are cute, but and it's the same thing if we want to talk about The Devil Wears Prada and Meryl Streep, is that, okay, no, I do not want to work for that woman. And she would have driven me crazy. But I'd kind of like to have that kind of power at some point in my life.
Yeah.
To where like there's a scene in that where they're showing the collection and everybody's looking at her and she just goes, and everybody panics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people can relate to wanting to have that kind of power. Power is not the word I'm looking for. That kind of influence.
Yeah.
And that kind of fear and respect are very close. And so to be slightly feared and to just be at the point where I don't have to be nice to anybody. I can be as rude as I want and they're still going to do what I want. Now, I'm not that type of person because I get upset when I'm not nice to people. But that I think if you have that just a little slither of a connection, you can still have a great character, even if it's not somebody that you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, all right, then why do we want to watch things that involve characters we don't like? Like, those are kind of characters we don't like. But let's go really nasty. Like, what are good examples of like Voldemort or?
Well, but Voldemort still has a motivation. Right. I mean,
well, I'm not saying I don't want to bad characters, right? I mean, they're still relatable. Is that why we want to watch them? Because we can sort of relate?
I think in the case of like Voldemort or I'm a big Marvel fan, so the case of like Thanos and that kind of thing, I think what brings the character out there isn't so much that we want anything to do with them. We want to see them defeated. Mm-hmm. Because you have somebody in your life or you've dealt with somebody at some point that you're powerless against and that can make you feel bad or can ruin something for you. And so being able to see that they get defeated, and which is why, for my Marvel friends, which is why I had a huge problem with Infinity War, but we can talk about that some other time. So, okay, I won't spoil it, but if anybody's watching and you want to discuss it with me, I will totally discuss it.
Dawn's your girl.
I think the connection there is that you want to see the challenge against the character that you do like and the character that you're rooting for. And I think that's an important part of the next place where we need to go with this is you need to be able to root for a character. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's the villain. I mean, for my fellow Marvel fans, Loki's a pretty cool character. And so sometimes you've got the villain that you are rooting for, but they're not necessarily going to win. But I think part of that comes from seeing the characters face off and choosing a side.
Well, so that wanting to see the bad guy defeated thing, I think plays into a much deeper human desire to believe that there is good in the world, to believe that the evil can't triumph, that, even when things are bad, there's, the good guy has to win, or that the good guy might win or has a chance to win. I think that's a critical piece of horror and sci-fi and even romance. If there's a true antagonist, there often isn't, but I think that's the thing that makes people read thrillers and mysteries, because they know that even though there's this horrible person, a serial killer, or, really bad guys, they're not going to win.
Right. And then we get really mad if they do. Because
ever?
Okay, we're not going to talk about Infinity War, but there are some examples of, for example, there's an older book that I loved whenever I was a teenager called The Chocolate War, and it's by a man named Robert Cormier, and the good guy doesn't win. And it was written for upper, like 7th to 9th grade is about the age I would say it was written for. And I did some kind of project on it where I had to read articles that he had written because there was a huge outrage about it. And his response was, the kids will understand why it ended this way. They won't like it, but they will understand it.
Did you understand it?
I did, because if you'd ever been in high school, you understood it. But so I think the looking at it from that point of view, yes, we get so angry when it doesn't happen because I'm looking for an escape.
Right. Well, and I know we said we were going to step away from books a little bit, but I would have to say that's got to be literary fiction then, because otherwise none of these, the bad guy can't win. That doesn't fulfill the promise of the genre.
Right.
If it's a thriller, if it's a mystery, if it's romance, whatever. And we have a few comments. Laura and Brooke are talking about suddenly I've lost my capability to form a sentence. Why we like those characters we were talking about before. In Devil Wears Prada, she says there's a scene where her assistant gets a glimpse that her private life isn't great, and we can relate to personal lives that don't always match professional. And kind of the same thing with Loki, because he has good reasons for betraying the people who raised him. So
yes,
you do have to see some shred of humanity, and we see that even with Voldemort.
Well, and it's the thing that we're always saying on this is everybody needs a motivation. Characters aren't bad just to be bad. There's something back there in there. And when we get to talking about our TV shows here in a minute, we'll kind of talk about that, because there's very few people in the world are just evil because they're just evil. And if you're writing a paranormal or a fantasy or whatever, yes, you can bring in demons and that kind of thing. But in general, regular life, it's the whole everybody's going through some kind of battle. And so even though you think they're evil or mean just to be mean, there's something behind that.
Right.
And that's what's so important when you're making a well-rounded character, that their actions need justification. So,
yeah.
And,
all right. Well, so I'm looking at some of the questions that you have here. The draw for characters varies from person to person. Well, okay. So that sets up the love triangle conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you obviously bring your personal bias to anything you're reading or anything you're watching. And so it's interesting sometimes to hear people talk about various characters and what they love and what they don't. For example, the TV show Everybody Loves Raymond, which was on a million years ago. It's a good show, but there is a particular character on there that is so much like a person in my real life. I couldn't watch the show because it just made my skin crawl. And so
we will have this conversation later, because there is a character on that show who I also know in real life.
Okay.
And I wonder if it's a character.
So I think your personal bias is going to play into it a whole lot. That also goes with romance characters too. When you're reading some of these heroes that people write, that may be somebody's hero, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be yours. If you've dated somebody like that, and sometimes it can be something as simple as, oh, they have the same name. They can be completely different people. But it's hard to get past that personal bias. And
Yeah.
then, but so
That
we were
was
talking about,
crazy
go ahead.
names for heroes that nobody actually has, like Archer.
Yes, I think so.
One of our
Because,
readers will be like, oh, I dated an Archer.
yeah, because you have such an association to names that if you read somebody that's when you read that name, that picture pops up in their head. Okay, my husband's name's Scott. Anytime I see the name Scott, my husband pops into my head. And so if you're reading something of, there's a guy named Carl and Carl was a jerk to you in high school, you're not going to fall in love with Carl. You're going to be rooting for the other guy to get whatever girl Carl is going for at this point. So, and that's what we were talking about, setting up the love triangle, which, of course, I brought up Twilight.
Because
So,
plus
you have to.
it's back, right? Because of
Right.
that son. And okay, this is probably not the right forum for this conversation, but why not? So I rapidly read all the Twilight books when they came out, and everybody was all excited about them. I think I was doing some training for work or something, and I was like stuck in a hotel for a week, and so I just read them all at night when I wasn't doing work stuff. Wasn't there already something written from Edward's point of view? Because I feel like I read it.
If I remember the story correctly, because it's been a really long time, so anybody who's watching can correct me. If I remember the story correctly, she was writing this, and then part of it got leaked, and so she just put it up on her website because she didn't want her fans going places they didn't need to be going to get it, but it wasn't complete.
Oh, yeah, and I thought okay, so I read, because I was like rabid, I read whatever I could get my hands on. And I was like, it can't be over.
Right, because it just, and so I guess this is the completion. So I have to ask, were you Team Edward or Team Jacob?
Edward, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't understand anyone that was Team Jacob. It made no sense to me. I guess you like Jacob.
Yeah,
it was a vampire book.
but Jacob's warm and he's fluffy, and I'm a dog person. I mean,
that's true. How do you sleep with a cold guy all the time?
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I felt like even back when I first read it, because I did the same thing. I read all of them. I was teaching high school at the time, so I read all of them and then got to listen to conversations about them all day long. I was teaching high school when the first movie came out, and there was such an outrage about who had been cast as what, and she doesn't even look like Bella's supposed to look.
I made my husband watch one of those movies, and he refers to it as, what does he call it? The longest Pottery Barn commercial he's ever seen. I don't know which movie it was, but whatever it was when they were all at like Edward's family's house for a long time, waiting for some bad guys to show up or something. Like they were stuck in there. And so it was like a lot of furniture lounging and like, I don't know. It's like, this is so boring.
So that's accurate, I would say. So my thing about Edward is I felt like Edward was a little too controlling, and the whole showing up in her bedroom and staring at her while she sleeps kind of creeped me out. And so I'm going to have to remember which book it was. The book where Edward leaves and she's on the ground in the woods. And then most of the book is Jacob and her, is that eclipse?
I don't know.
Or new moon. I don't remember. Anyway, I remember having a conversation with one of my students because I was like, because she was reading it and she got to the part where Edward comes back. And she was like, I was so surprised. I didn't think he was going to come back. And I was like, he absolutely was going to come back. I never questioned that at all. And she was like, how did you know? And I'm like, well, okay, first of all, because I'm not 15, but I also know how stories work. Right. Yeah. So I think it's interesting. And that's an example of the personal bias, because I would have taken Jacob over Edward any day.
Yeah.
Except for Kelly has felt the need to point out that Jacob imprinted on a baby. And I will admit that was creepy.
The way he talked about it was weird too. Like, I don't know. I just know that I love her. Like, ew, no.
I will give you that that's where it went to a weird place. Okay. I will give you
weird places starting in book 1, but without dissecting what was, could have been done differently in that particular story, because you cannot argue with the fact that it was absolutely wildly 100% popular. And if I write a story that was flawed as that was and still completely wonderfully successful, then absolutely let me do that.
And so I think when we're talking about setting up the love triangle, and you've got to have, that's how you create those teams, is you have to have two very fully, we'll say that Edward was fully rounded, two very fully developed characters so that people can develop an opinion on him.
Well, and I mean, hers were so polarized, hot and cold, right? Furry, sparkly.
And furry win every time.
A total stranger. Like, they were diametrically opposed. But how do other people, like, it's not always easy to set things up that way in a real world romance or a real world story where you're going to have a love triangle. Making your choice that day and night is pretty impossible unless you are writing, vampires and fairies or whatever.
So that kind of leads us into talking about some of the TV shows that we were going to talk about, because I know you wanted to talk about Younger.
I do, but you haven't watched it, have you?
I have seen, I think, 1 or 2 episodes.
I'm in love with that show.
Okay, so what do you like about the characters on it?
Well, so again, I bring my personal bias to the table. Younger, if you haven't watched it, is about a woman in her 40s with a child who goes through a divorce that she wasn't expecting and ends up having to go back to work after having been a housewife for 18 years or something. So she's been out of the workforce for almost 2 decades, and she worked in publishing. So that's also interesting to me. And she lives near New York City, and I used to live in New York. And so all those things combined just made me go like, oh, wow, that sounds cool. So she can't get a job, and she ends up lying about her age to get a job. So she passes for younger and gets this job at a publishing company. And the rest of the show kind of goes on from there. But it's all based on this premise that she's lying to get what she needs and wants. And so at the very beginning, you're kind of like, okay, well, I like this character, but at the same time, what she's doing is kind of wrong. And then it turns a little soap opera-y, with a love triangle and interesting other things. But her character is so clearly flawed and yet still super relatable, to me at least. And also just really likable. Like, she's a super nice person who told this horrible lie and basically committed fraud in order to advance her career. And so I just think it's set up very well because she is such an interesting character.
Well, and I think you're making a great point of the character is flawed. She's not perfect. She's not, and she's doing something that you wouldn't necessarily agree with, but she's still likable and relatable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key.
Well, they do such a good job of making you feel like you really get her, that I almost, even though I don't think I could do what she did, I almost found myself, I totally found myself rooting for her and being like, well, I mean, you can't be mad at her about that. Like, look at how good she is at her job. Come on.
Well, and I think we see that too with people that in real life. You see your friends that you're like, okay, they made a really bad decision right there, but I love them and I'm going to support them even if I don't agree with what they did.
Right.
And that's when you've got a good character, is when the reader or the viewer is attached to the character enough that they're willing to forgive something that they've done.
Well, and the other thing that is brilliant about setting up the story overall that way is that building that lie into the character's person at the very beginning means that we've got all these conflicts lined up, because the other characters clearly at some point are going to find out that she's been lying. Mm-hmm. And, it goes so far that she gets into a relationship with a younger man because he thinks she's 27. And so they take it pretty far before, she ends up having to come clean. And I think he ends up, I don't want to spoil things, but I don't think she gets to tell him. I think he finds out some other way. I can't remember, but it's not good.
That's how it always works.
Yeah.
That's how the lying always works.
Yeah. But so there's so many characters that you get involved with as you watch the show. And the longer the lie is perpetuated, the more tension gets built around, you just know, like, they're going to find out. And so it's good.
Well, and we're going to talk to you later in this series about like conflict and tension and that kind of thing. One of the shows that I was thinking about that I thought brought this kind of home is I love the show Firefly. And
I've got to watch that. I hear about it all the time and I've never seen a single episode.
Well, it's older now, but it's a sci-fi Old West set in space type thing.
Of course.
Yes. I mean, it's Nathan Fillion. What else do you want? But the characters on there, all of them are super flawed. Like you have Nathan Fillion, whose character fought for the government really, and then realized that was a bad thing. And so he's kind of sketchy on his business deals. And then you have another woman who's on the ship who is a professional companion. And she's very sweet and very beautiful, but you know that this is her job on the side. And the thing that I liked about the show is they don't beat you over the head with who the characters are or what they're doing. It's very natural introduction. And one of the things that happens very early in the show is there's this sweet girl on the ship whose name is Kaylee, and everybody loves Kaylee, and Kaylee's the sweet little bubbly, she's the mechanic, but everybody loves her. And then at one point she accidentally gets shot, and they've got her in the medical bay and they're working on her. And there's a male character on the show named Jane, who is like, you don't think he has feelings for anybody. He is strictly, my favorite thing in the world is this great big gun that I have. I will kill anybody. I don't have any empathy for anybody, anything like that. And so Jane, you feel like at the beginning, he's going to kind of be like just this very stoic, one-layered type person that's over here. And when they show all of them working on Kaylee and trying to save her, they show Jane sitting outside of the medical bay, and you can see that he's upset. And I think that's a good example of nobody had to say Jane actually has a soft spot for Kaylee. It just shows him out there, and you can see like he's sad and he's watching, and that he cares about her without having to throw it out in front of everybody. So
I need to watch that show. I've heard so many people talk about it. And I think, I don't know what I was watching when that was on, but evidently it took up a lot of my time. And I never got to Firefly.
You only have so much space. So the other show that we were going to talk about that we have both seen is The Office.
The Office.
So let's talk about the characters there.
Well, so when we first mentioned talking about The Office, I was like, but I don't know if that's a great example because all the characters are like stereotypes. And then Dawn was like, but that's exactly why we should talk about it.
Yes.
Because all of the characters, I think the reason why that show works so well is because everyone kind of stays in their lane. You know, it's like going to a party where you're going to see a bunch of your friends. You kind of know who's going to be there and what they're usually doing.
It's very comforting.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it a show like that, especially like a half-hour show, very watchable and something that people go back to week after week after week because they depend on the consistency of the characters. The plots might go all over the place, but
yeah, the plots get a little crazy. And that's the same thing that's important with the writing too, is like you said, your character needs to be consistent. And we try, obviously you don't want to write characters that are stereotypes, but stereotypes are there for a reason. And so if you have I'm I'm missing the word, archetype. Is that right for a character?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you have like the spunky best friend, and then you have the grumpy old guy in the corner and that kind of thing, you can have them act a little bit out of their lane, but you don't want them completely changing direction.
Right.
Because there's a comfort in this is what I can expect.
Right. Well, and I think having a character like Dwight, say, come totally out of his lane and do something else, that's not characterization as much as plot. Like that is the plot of that show, of that episode, is that Dwight is going to do this totally bizarre thing because, right?
Well, and readers and viewers pick up on that quick if you're manipulating a character for the purpose of plot. Now, in The Office, there's definitely points where it just happens because it just happened. But we're going to spoil just a little bit, because The Office has been over for a long time, and hopefully everybody knows that Pam and Jim end up together, which is the sweetest thing ever for me. But there was a episode where Jim is working out of town, and there is a woman who is clearly coming on to him. And I didn't like her. I was very grumpy about her.
I never liked her either.
Yeah, she was not my favorite. But if Jim's character had been tempted by that at all, or if he had gone through with what?
They did date.
No. After they were married, there's a scene where they're.
Oh, okay. I'm rewatching it, so I thought you were talking about Rashida Jones, her character.
No. There's another character after Jim and Pam are married, and Jim is working out of town. It's when he's left the office and he's working out of town, and for some reason he's staying in a hotel room, and there's another woman that comes to the hotel room and is like, "Oh, I'll sit here and watch basketball with you," and like sits on the bed with him, and he's like, "Nope."
Okay. I don't think I ever watched that far, and I haven't gotten that far in my rewatching. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't mean to spoil it for you.
That's okay.
But if Jim's character, because Jim's character is totally like, no, you have to leave. No, but if Jim's character had given into that, if he had, come anywhere close to cheating on Pam, that would have been very clear that was done strictly to create some conflict, because that's not something he would have ever done.
Yeah.
That's not something he's been set up. And then you have characters like Michael Scott. And what do we do with them?
Yeah. Well, I think, I guess, if we have to peg archetypes, I mean, he's the wild card. He's
a chameleon. He changes to whatever situation he's in, but not very well.
Or he's the Joker, I guess.
Yeah, jester.
Yeah, because he's always providing comic relief, and you never quite know what he's going to do, although it's going to be the wrong thing.
Yes. And again, there's some consistency there too. If you had ever had an episode of The Office where Michael did not make a bad decision, you would know that the writers were off that day. And
the thing about The Office that I struggled with as we were rewatching, especially the first couple of seasons, how did Michael Scott ever get made a manager? Like, the rest of the management team, when you go see them in New York or whatever, they seem fairly rational. So the idea that, although then we've got Jan, and she was crazier than.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to making it relatable to real life, because we have all been at some point in our lives under somebody that you're like, how did you get in that position?
That's true. Yeah.
How on earth first of all, how did you live this long? Because I'm pretty sure you can't tie your own shoes. But the fact that you have lived this long, and you have reached this level of whatever industry we're in, just stuns me. Yeah. So please explain your secret.
Yeah.
So
my favorite part of that was the temp becoming like the big boss, and then getting brought back down to being the temp.
Yeah. What is his name? Ryan.
Yeah.
Because you rarely get to see that happen in real life either. So.
Yeah. What else? I think, have you watched Dead to Me, or did we just talk about it? And
I've heard about it, but I haven't watched it.
okay. Because that one, I think, has some pretty interesting characterization, too. There's kind of two main characters. Christina Applegate is the widow. Her husband is killed in a violent hit and run. And then we have the other character who is her best friend. And I'm not ruining anything because we know from the first or second episode that, I hope I'm right, pretty early on that she was involved in the hit and run. And they become friends after the accident. So it's a really interesting, again, I think I like shows where there's that tension built in, like there's some kind of a lie or a mistruth or something that I'm just like, oh, they're going to uncover it and then we'll see what happens.
Well, and that's another thing that comes up with characters too, is they almost all have secrets.
Right. Well, I think I just pointed out like a plot element more than a characterization element, but you get Christina Applegate is this sort of hard-edged bitch, and you get the sense that she was that way before, but she's even more that way now. Like, the smoking, guzzling a bottle of wine to cope, has 2 kids at home, just kind of trying to hold it together, but looks amazing, and is just kind of a raging bitch. And then her counterpoint is this like very sweet, wouldn't hurt a fly woman who it turns out actually did hurt a fly. And so watching them kind of rotate around each other, I think is what makes it fun.
Yes. That interaction to have the playing off of each other is always good.
Yeah. And it's not a love triangle, but they're kind of like an Edward and Jacob.
So you choose if you're team this one or team that one?
Maybe a little bit at first. And then I think I think I've seen 2 seasons. I don't think they haven't made a third. I've watched whatever's out. But I think they're getting them on one side against a new kind of a threat. So
I'll have to watch that. I haven't watched it.
I'm trying to think what else. We've got a list here.
Well, the other one I was going to bring up was Community, because it is another one kind of like The Office that the people are, exactly what you're getting, but it's set in a community college. And so when you see these people, you're like, oh yeah, I knew you and I knew you and I know you. And so the reason that I wanted to bring that one up though, is because those characters are getting to the point, like you were talking about, that it's a comfort that they're going to act this way. And I think we're on the last season now, and you can see where the character ran out of steam, basically. And so they're starting to go back over the same kind of conflict, and the character hasn't grown any. Like if you look back from the very first episode, my family and I have a standing argument about this one particular character, that if you look back from the first episode, they haven't changed any. And we're always talking about that when we're talking with our writers about your character needs to be in a different place at the end of the book than they were at the beginning.
Right.
And if you look at The Office, even with Michael Scott, if you look at him from the beginning to where he ends up, he's still crazy, but you can tell that he's made these different choices and he's matured and he ends up in a very good place. And with Community, what we're seeing is everybody's like still here. There isn't the arc there.
Well, and I think that's probably a challenge in episodic writing to navigate, every episode has to have some kind of an arc, but then overall, and this is true when writing a series too, if you're going to have recurring characters, that's a challenge to make sure that they change enough in one episode to keep it, authentic and interesting, but also that they have further to go to complete the series.
Right. That's something that you need to consider if you're planning on writing multiple books about the same characters, is how are they going to change in each? They've got their little baby steps, but then how do they make the whole staircase, basically?
Yeah.
It's the end.
Well, I was just thinking about MASH. I don't know why. Did you ever watch that show?
I remember watching that show when I was very little.
I've watched it a long time because my parents watch it in reruns still. So I feel like I still see this show. And I feel like that maybe it's because of the setting of the war, but those characters are just, I felt like very dynamic. Like they all had such turmoil, and I don't know. I guess I don't have a lot to say about it other than if you want like some some deep characterization and an easy to watch show and transitions and transformations galore, MASH is a great example.
So to wrap this all up, they need to be interesting, they need to be relatable, they need to have flaws, and they need to change. Did we miss anything? They need to not imprint on a baby, evidently, according to Kelly.
Or watch people sleep after breaking into their home. Yeah. If you're invited in to watch someone sleep, that's totally different, and that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, but you got to get permission for that kind of stuff. We're in an age of consent, and consent's important. So,
right. Well, and the bad guy cannot win unless you're writing literary fiction.
Right.
Or there's going to be a sequel and you're writing sci-fi,
yes.
or something like that.
Yes, and that sequel better be ready. And don't make me wait a year for the sequel. I'm just saying.
People get mad. People like.
Yeah, I will be angry at you that entire year. So.
All right. Well, that probably wraps it up. I could talk about TV shows forever, but I doubt anyone wants to listen to it. So.
Well, and thank you for everybody who engaged in our conversation today. Because I'm seeing a couple of comments that we missed. Edward was controlling and abusive, cutting her off from her friends and family. Yes.
Yeah, he was. But I mean, that's. What she says next. That's not the character. That's bad writing from the author. So extremely popular. Yes. Very successful.
Extremely popular. That's all we're going to say about that. It's extremely popular.
When you're a New York Times bestseller.
And next week we have Sierra Simone.
Speaking of New York Times bestsellers.
Yes.
Speaking of New York Times bestseller. Anyway, maybe not.
And she will be here talking about deep POV. Yeah.
If you haven't read a Sierra Simone book, well, I mean, you have to like Sex on the Page if you want to read a Sierra Simone.
Lots of it.
Just glorious writing, beautiful language, a lot of sex. Very well done. And I've had the pleasure of working on a lot of her books. And I admire her a lot. You guys will see why next week. She's an amazing person, but she's really, really on target with the deep POV. You know her characters as if they were sitting next to you and explaining their entire lives to you. But it's not like backstory dumping. It's like you'll see, she's a master. But if you're going to go read a book, I highly recommend American Queen. I think that's the first one in the new Camelot trilogy. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Or if you want something newer, Harvest of Sighs, I want to say. That might not be the first one in the new story that she's writing. But go look at her Amazon page. You'll figure it out.
Okay. And I think that's all we have going on. We have other people that we're trying to schedule, but we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. So hopefully next week we'll have our schedule in a little bit more into September.
Right. And the courses are still up, as always. Elements of Romance, if you're looking for a quick plotting tool or a strategy to approach plotting. Maybe you've read a whole bunch of plotting books and you're just not sure how to apply it all. This will walk you kind of step by step pretty quick through how to easily plot a romance. Or deep POV, which we'll talk about even more next week, kind of how your class agrees with what Sierra tells us. And we've got exciting stuff coming up on our Teachable site too. We just aren't quite ready to talk about it, I think.
Not yet, but it's going to be good. And the Pinterest page is up to 9 followers. So, I just need one more and I'll have made my goal for this month.
Very good.
Yes, I'm so excited about 10 people. Yes, there you go.
All right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we hope to see you next week with Sierra Simone. We'll talk to you then.
Bye.